Today, continuing our discussions on government during the Enlightenment period, looking this time at Central and Eastern Europe. Then look at what's happening over in North America, the colonial wars, how that's going to have sparking the American Revolution. And having profound effects in Europe, rippling across the world. So look at Frederick William I of Prussia. Basically, Prussia is the area basically roughly ended up becoming Germany later on. Frederick II, also known as Frederick the Great. In Austria, look at Maria Theresa and Joseph II. Then Russia with Catherine II, also called Catherine the Great. Achievements including instruction, Pugachev's Rebellion, Charter of Nobility. And we'll dive into the colonial wars. King William's War, Queen Anne's War, those are the English names for them. The War of Austrian Succession, and King George's War. Okay, questions, any of those? Okay. So you have those figures who are kings who are in the Enlightenment trying to modernize their country, some looking to reform, some looking for greater power and glory for themselves. We go to Prussia. Now, here on the map on page 547, you see the map of Europe as it existed in the mid-18th century. It's a very different looking Europe from what we have today. The borders twisted around, bloated, or some countries that exist today that don't exist then. 547. But the main point of contention in Central Europe is the fight over this area outlined in red, the Holy Roman Empire. That's basically the area that's going to become Germany. Germany at this point is only a disorganized series of city-states and principalities. But Prussia is beginning to dominate. Now, Austria had seen itself as a dominant power for a long time, but Austria is starting to push outward and take over territory. They're starting to become the dominant power. It's going to be a real rival of Austria. So it's going to be dominating the politics of Central Europe for most of the 18th century. So you got Prussia here in the dark brown and Austria in the dark green. But Austria isn't just the German areas, because both the Prussians and the Austrians are both speaking German. Austria has an empire that's expanding outward into the south, taking in basically about half a dozen different ethnic groups. Very large area of Central Europe. But Prussia is beginning to dominate the areas of Germany. Let's stop and take a look at this man here, Frederick William I. King of Prussia from 1713 to 1714. And basically started trying to organize and centralize the government of Prussia. Had a civil service he called the General Directory. Basically, the chief administrative agents of the central government that be controlling the directory, basically making sure everything is run efficiently and without corruption. Basically, it's these two men, Frederick William and Frederick II, that really start giving Germany's reputation for efficiency. So they've got an effective system of civil service employees. They're well-trained, well-educated. They have a simple code they operate by. Obedience, honor, and service to the king. Obedience, honor, and service to the king. But of course, he needs an efficient system because they have to raise a lot of money because Frederick William wants a big army so he can start taking over more territory across Prussia. So under his reign, the army grew from about 45,000 up to 83,000. So it may not seem like a lot today, but that was a huge army for the time period. Next, the armies of 30,000, 40,000 considered to be large armies at that time. But you don't start seeing the armies of 1 million men until like the French Revolution. By the time he died in 1740, Prussia was the 10th largest country in Europe by size, but the 13th largest by population. but the army was the fourth largest in Europe.
Wow.
It's a much larger army, very large proportion of the population compared to other countries. But it was very expensive to maintain. But it also became a great source of national pride for Prussia. Actually, it's only smaller than the armies of France, Austria, and Russia. Even bigger than the English army. It's a very large, powerful army in its own right. Now, in Prussia, the king was an absolute ruler. But the thing you have to understand about absolute monarchies and how they're practiced sometimes is their power is not always quite so absolute. Now, they have the power in theory to do anything they want. In practice, that's a little bit harder. Because in Prussia, you have a landed aristocracy called the Junkers. In German, the J is pronounced as a Y. The Junkers, they're very powerful. They control the land, the money. They still practice serfdom at this point in Prussia. They're slowly trying to phase it out, but basically, a lot of the manpower supplied to the armies comes from these guys. They are basically people who work for them on their farms, their lands, are the ones they're agreeing to send to the king for the army. And so in that kind of situation, that people with that kind of power, that kind of money, they have the power to say no to the king. Enough of them say no, they can get together and overthrow the king. So the king has to settle for certain political realities. Power is limited in some areas, some things he just can't do, especially if he wants to avoid a civil war being overthrown or dying a sudden mysterious death. I'd say, but both men, Frederick William and Frederick Great, they had to play Junkers well. They knew how to maneuver. But the Junkers, they're insisting we put on most positions of power and authority, especially being senior positions in the military. They're the officers. But then we get to Frederick II, also known as Frederick the Great. Well educated and intelligent, he followed the Enlightenment, a lot of the thinkers and the theories, fascinated by the ideas. Didn't necessarily agree with them or try to implement them, just was fascinated by it, with scientific and technical aspects of it. Sharp mind, excellent tactical mind. In fact, he invited the playwright Voltaire to live at the royal palace for a time. Just fascinated by the man.
You eventually kick him out.
Eventually, except Voltaire would sometimes overstay his welcome, as did Rousseau and others, but he's fascinated by it. Well, Frederick was a different mind. He was enlightened despots. He believed the king was, in his words, the first servant of the state, that he serves the state. So the state wasn't his to own, but it's his to serve and guide. Basically, he's trying to put a not happy face on an absolute monarchy. We have a portrait here of Frederick on page 549. This guy in the kind of military-looking uniform of the blue and red overcoat. Well, what he did was he established a single code of laws for his territories. That is, all the territory of Prussia wasn't all connected by land. You understand? If you're born into the royal family, your title isn't just, say, King of England and that's it. You might have 4, 5, 10 different titles. At one point, the Austrian emperor had 50 different titles.
Wow.
It was a mouthful. So, he ends up inheriting by different means, or buying, or just outright. His army politely moving through a friend's territory to take over some other little village or something. So you got miles between the border of his land and the next stretch of Prussian territory. But because they're being
Russia
brought,
wasn't like one country.
it was one country, but it's little spots here and there. And all these little spots are Prussia, say.
That wasn't all.
Yeah, it wasn't all intact.
And what was in between?
Different states, different principalities.
There's a lot of fighting.
Actually, so sometimes there would be a lot of fighting. Sometimes making an alliance with somebody so you can move their territory. Actually, all sorts of different reasons why you do something a particular way. Actually, alliance systems in Europe, they changed from that time, this time period. The best friends and allies in one war, bitter enemies in the next one. For no reason at all, just because the wind changed directions.
It's like it would be hard to maintain territories when they're so spread out.
It was. It's difficult to maintain order. But the one thing that was saving Prussia in this time was that a lot of the territories surrounding these smaller areas are very weak themselves. So they knew if they didn't want to mess with Prussia, they just wouldn't leave their small territories alone. But because these different territories, these outlying areas not connected to the larger Prussia, brought in different times, they have different sets of laws. So, for the purpose of efficiency, of course, Frederick the Great says all Prussian territory will have the same laws. Period.
At least that simplifies things.
It does. Greatly simplified, and some changes in some areas, but actually he did believe in some Enlightenment ideas, initiated some modest reforms, modest by our standards, but were sort of be major breakthroughs for that time. For example, he eliminated the use of torture, except in cases involving murder or treason. Basically, routine torture, just beating somebody just because they can, or they're try to beat a confession out of a robbery suspect or something, that was eliminated.
Except in the case of what?
Murder or treason. It's for one simple reason. What reason is that? Torture doesn't work. It never has. You see, you're inflicting so much pain on someone. What do you think they're going to do? Are they going to tell you the truth, or are you going to tell them what you think they want to hear? Exactly what you think they want to hear. Anything to make it stop. So it doesn't work. The information's unreliable. That's why civilized nations have abandoned torture. That's why it's a violation of international law. It doesn't work, too. It's just so horribly inhumane.
International law, like, that means, like, there's, like, laws that, like, basically all the civilized countries agree to. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
There basically it's all these countries get together and sign treaties. Say, okay, we're not going to do this.
Like the UN.
I say sometimes to the United Nations. The United Nations will have this big treaty that everybody signs, or just kind of a broker negotiation. Sometimes it's different countries getting together and meeting at different conferences around the world. It depends. But torture is illegal by international law everywhere. But some countries still do it. They're basically breaking the law to do it.
Just because it's a rule doesn't mean everyone abide by it. That's even here.
A sad, unfortunate reality.
I'm quite sure we still do it.
We did it.
Yeah, exactly.
It was wrong, and
Yes, sir.
except some people caught doing it were court-martialed, thrown in the military, thrown in jail.
Was it in Guantanamo?
Yeah, at Guantanamo, that's a serious. A lot of people are objecting that around the world, saying it is torture and a violation of human rights. Torture of suspects being held in Iraq. A lot of people are court-martialed over that. So.
Sure.
Actually, and the reasons why George W. Bush and Dick Cheney can't travel outside the country, because they may be arrested for human rights violations around the world.
You said
George W. Bush, I'm not kidding. Basically said, let's break the law and start beating people.
right.
I'm good to hear.
civilized nation decided this just isn't going to work. We're not going to torture people. We're not going to torture prisoners because it doesn't work. There's no benefit from it. It's not practical. It's just we can say we only have the sadists who want to do it.
Right.
And Frederick II is one of these early leaders saying, this is wrong. This has to stop. Now he's interested in getting rid of serfdom. Like I say, serfdom, it's, like I said, in Prussia you're working for these Junkers, or in other countries for other nobles, basically these large landowners. Basically, you are tied by generational debt and generational obligation. Basically, you are working for this landowner your entire life. He's providing you food and shelter, but in exchange you have to do everything he says. Basically, it's slavery in every shape, way, and form, except for the fact it can't be arbitrarily bought and sold. Like I say, Frederick the Great is interested in eliminating it. He makes a few feelers around the edges trying to eliminate it, but the Junkers say no. So much opposition from them, he just can't do anything about it.
This is Frederick II.
Yeah, Frederick II. And because he needs the Junkers for a larger purpose. Frederick the Great wants to be a great conqueror. He wants to expand Prussia's power even further. So he needs the support of the Junkers. So as a result, he ends up banning commoners from having power in the civil service. So the Junkers will have all the senior positions. The army is enlarged from 83,000 up to 200,000. A big army. Now, the meantime, what's happening is there's problems with the succession in Austria. Their emperor died, and there was no clear male heir, so some confusion over who's going to be ruling Austria, confusion in the government. So what happens? Frederick sees his chance and invades Austria. Seizes an area called Silesia. So you can see it back here on page 547. It's that little area just north of Prague, underneath where it says Brandenburg, Prussia. A little strip of territory. Frederick goes in and seizes very quickly. It sparks a long war in Europe called the War of the Austrian Succession. Basically, that's what started it. Dispute over the succession in Austria. Now, in some cases, these wars of succession, like 1740 to 44, in some cases, these wars, it's a civil war in this country, and countries line up one side or another back, one candidate for king or another, because they think this one person might be better for their interests in the long run than the other one. Sometimes they just jump into this war one side or another because it's a good excuse to kind of settle a few old scores. In some cases, such confusion, like Frederick the Great, you see a prime opportunity, your enemy's back is turned, you can see some prime real estate, which is what Frederick did. Well, this ends up sparking two major wars between Austria and Prussia, enveloping a large portion of Europe in the process. The War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was called the French and Indian War in America. But eventually he ends up taking control of all of Prussia, and Russia's 1772 partition of Poland gave the territory between Brandenburg and Prussia, helping solidify his hold on major territories. So by the time Frederick the Great dies in 1786, Prussia has been established as a great European power, ready to eclipse Austria in its scale of power and influence.
Prussia still functions.
They united all the other German states. That's all Germany now. Now let's see their opponent here, Austria. Austria was capital of Vienna, great cultural center, a lot of center of music, a lot of important architecture. But because it's a large empire encompassing a lot of different nationalities and ethnic groups, it established a lot of different common laws and administrative centers. Basically, laws aren't always the same in different parts of Austria at this point. Beginning of the 18th century is ruled by the Habsburg dynasty. The Habsburg family, the same ones who had ruled Spain for so long. Here's what happens. Charles VI is the Emperor of Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. 1711 dies in 1740. He added lands to the southeast taken from the Ottoman Turks who had seized a lot of Eastern Europe. But he died with this country deeply in debt. So when he died, no surviving son, a lot of unrest emerged, a lot of desertions in the army. He had 4 children overall, but his only son died in infancy. He had 3 daughters. The oldest was Maria Theresa. That's all his weakness, confusion. Maria Theresa comes to the throne, and immediately she finds herself in a war with Prussia. She's also the Holy Roman Emperor, the Holy Roman Empress, as her father was, but it's becoming less and less important in the affairs of Central Europe. You know, Prussia is a part of the Holy Roman Empire too, but it's ignoring Charles and Maria. But with Maria Theresa, it says she's a very effective monarch. Very efficient, has a lot of ideas, knows how the government runs, knows how it needs to be run. Under her reign, you see some centralization of administration, enlargement of the military. She has a ton of kids, about 10 altogether. See on page 549 here at the bottom. Lady on the right, that is Maria Theresa. Yeah. Except no cable TV, so
That's what I was looking at. Man.
nice big happy family. Or say,
Humans
but
are a lot
it's
different these days. I was thinking to myself, like, look like I'm sure we have, but like we've evolved a lot.
subtle ways. Like I said, generally, draws are getting smaller. Being involved to become more socialized, but a lot of the changes here is diet and health. People are taller now because generally we're eating better, living longer lives.
I said, I think society has evolved more
Oh,
than
yeah.
that species.
That does, and that affects how we develop as a species as well as how we're interacting with one another.
Yeah, we're all-
But, of course, style of dress is very different. Said no one dresses like you see in that portrait anymore. At least not unless it's a fancy costume ball or something. But
I think it was kind of cool.
I read that men were actually the first ones to ever wear wigs, and then also
And
were the
tights.
first ones to ever wear tights and makeup.
yeah,
And then somehow, for some reason, it shifted over and they decided, oh, men aren't supposed to wear that.
yeah, because it's very interesting. Because at the time, though, being considered to be part of the upper class, you didn't do any work. You stayed indoors, so you didn't get tan from working outside. So the paler you looked, the wealthier more influential you looked. So men would basically, especially European nobles, they would powder their faces to make it look paler, put white wigs on to make it even paler. That came the tradition in English courts that is today that you wear a white wig when going, and you are a lawyer.
Yeah, that's why that.
Women initially did not wear makeup. Because going to the 1400s, 1500s, the only ones who wore makeup were prostitutes. Slowly that changed. But the makeup they were wearing initially, the European noble women wore, instead of white powder on their face, make themselves paler. Like say, if You worked out in the fields. You were at darker tan. Like I said, you're considered to be low class. You were looked down on.
See the
Like I say, in the South, the term redneck for people who worked out in the fields, and of course, the back of their neck getting sunburned, that was an insult. Still an insult. Yeah. Anyway, hey, you're about to say?
I was just saying it like it's totally different from the history that they give us in cosmetology school. They would say I guess the upper class women dye their hair red, and the lower class women dye their hair black, and the Egyptians started the makeup. And,
Yeah, Egyptians would wear a lot of makeup for different reasons, but makeup styles and interests came and went with different cultures. Like I say, people sometimes would dye their hair for different cultures for different reasons, but it just really depends on the time period you were and where you were at. Would lower class women sometimes dye their hair? Yes, but not very often. Usually, just didn't have the money for it. Upper class women, they sometimes dye their hair red. Well, sometimes, especially have Elizabethan England, because the Queen has red hair. You don't look like her. And of course, women sometimes start wearing wigs because one like Queen Elizabeth wearing a very thick makeup that was basically destroying her skin. She had to keep wearing it. Keep up looking older, and her hair getting thinner. She wore these very thick yarn wigs.
Big wig.
Okay, it's a long, interesting history. But anyway, Maria Theresa is doing a very good job fighting and fighting Prussia. All she ends up losing is Silesia, which is enough, but basically ends up holding her own against him. Managing to get an effective alliance of the different countries of Europe against Frederick. Basically, she's fighting a losing battle because her own country is so deeply divided. Remember, she is a German noblewoman, Roman Catholic, ruling all these other parts of a very large empire. Half a dozen different languages routinely spoken in different parts of the Austrian Empire. The German portion make it maybe a third of it. And they're not all Roman Catholic. You have a lot who are Orthodox Christian, very different faith. You have the rise of Protestantism in some areas here and there. So she's trying to centralize language, centralize authority, centralize religion, basically getting everyone focused culturally and think in terms of supporting the Empress, who was a German-speaking Catholic. They're trying to make everybody Catholic. In fact, to be considered a citizen of Austria, you had to be Roman Catholic. To access the courts as your own property in Austria, you had to be Roman Catholic. But along comes her son, Joseph II. Well, the surviving son, a lot of the upper classes in Europe in Austria decided that Maria Theresa should have basically a man should be running Austria, but they aren't throwing her off the throne. So in 1765, Joseph is old enough, so he's made co-regent with Maria Theresa. Basically, they're jointly ruling Austria. They have the different areas they're governing, consulting each other on day-to-day decisions, but Joseph is a real believer in the Enlightenment and all these ideas. He believes in all these reforms, believes in human freedom and justice, wants to make that happen. Recognizing that all the people of Austria, they don't all go to the same church, and said, why should that be a problem? Everyone should be able to go to whatever church they want. Maria Theresa, an old traditionalist, old conservative, decided, no, let's keep things as they are. Because religious issues, that literally was an issue of salvation, a heaven and hell issue, and was not going to budge on it. Believing as a Roman Catholic to the contrary, that there was only one church, and if you do not go to that church, you are damned. And making people be Roman Catholics, that was doing a favor to save their souls. But Joseph's idealistic, as all these ideas of reform, modernizing Austria, introducing all these civil liberties and changes in the justice, changes in the economy, changing everything, making it a modern country. That's making it as much an Enlightenment kingdom as any country could possibly be. And of course, Maria Theresa and Joseph argued all the time over it. Here's an excerpt from a couple of letters from between the two here. This is in 1777, part of it's cut off a bit.
That really wasn't that long. I mean, if you think about how long the Earth has been here, it really wasn't that long ago.
No, it really was not that long ago at all. A couple hundred years ago. So a lot of these ideas we have as Americans about our own personal freedoms, these are fairly recent in human history. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, due process of law, it's very new, very recent.
The Maria Theresa was the Empress of
Yes. Well, it begins here, Joseph to Maria Theresa on July 20th, 1777. They're arguing about religious toleration, this freedom of religion. And he's trying to explain his position. And it's only the word toleration which has caused misunderstanding. You're taking quite a different meaning from my expressed in your letter. God preserve me from thinking it a matter of indifference whether the citizens turn Protestant or remain Catholic. Still less whether they cleave to or at least observe the cult which they have inherited from their fathers. I give all possess if all the Protestants of your states would go over to Catholicism. He's Roman Catholic too. The word toleration, as I understand it, means only that I would employ any person to that distinction of religion in purely temporal matters. That is, not going to hire a Protestant to be a priest of the Catholic Church. Allowing non-Catholics to own their own property, practice trades, be citizens if they're qualified, and if this would be advantage to the state and its industry. Those who unfortunately adhere to a false faith are far further from being converted if they remain in their own country than if they migrate into another in which they can hear and see the convincing truths of the Catholic faith. Some of the undisturbed practice of their religion makes them far better subject and causes them to avoid irreligion, which is a far greater danger to our Catholics than if one lets them see others practice their religion unimpeded. Basically saying, if we leave them alone, they're not going to rise up against us. Not be these riots about people demanding their faith or trying to start a civil war. They said, if the two were left alone, then non-Catholics might see how Catholics are practiced, not be able to see their ideas, not see it necessarily as a threat, but be able to give Catholic faith honest consideration. Not necessarily see Catholicism as a threat. Maria Theresa writes back a little later, says, without a dominant religion, toleration, indifference, precisely the true meanings undermining everything, taking away every foundation. We others will then be the greatest losers. He is no friend of humanity, as the popular phrase is, because everyone has own thoughts. I'm only speaking in the political sense, not as a Christian. Nothing is so necessary in society as religion. We allow everyone to fashion his own religions he pleases. No fixed cult, no subordination to the church. What will then become of us? The result will not be quiet contentment. Rather, its outcome will be the rule of the stronger and more of these unhappy times like those which we've already seen. A manifesto by each of this effect can only produce the utmost disturbance and make you responsible for many thousands of souls. What are my own sufferings? When I see you entangled in opinions so erroneous, what is at stake is not the welfare of the state, but your own salvation. Taking your eyes and ears elsewhere, mingling your spirit of contradiction with the simultaneous desire to create something, you're ruining yourself and dragging the monarchy down with you into the abyss. Basically saying, if you change anything, there's not one dominant church, and everyone's going to be having to fix their own religion. Everyone's going a million different directions. There's going to be no churches at all, and everyone's going to be going to hell. Basically, you have to have one church not controlled by the state, otherwise everything falls into chaos. That's the kind of thinking Joseph II has been fighting on every issue, everything he wants to do. Because with Joseph II, he really believes in these ideas. Imagine if you're the ruler, you're a dictator of a country, and you had the power to do anything you wanted. And you want to do that to make life better for the people. Joseph wants to do it. Make life better for the people. Like I say, he respects people, different faiths, different ethnicities, respects their point of view, thinks, well, why can't they just live their life on their own terms? Why can't they make choices? And that's what he's trying to do. When his mother dies in 1780, he finally has the chance to rule on his own. Finally implement all these ideas he wants to. So he does embark on a wholesale series of changes and reforms that transforms the Austrian state. He abolishes serfs, basically lets all the serfs go their own way. Tried to give peasants hereditary rights to their holdings, basically break up the large manors and give them their own lands, but that didn't work. Tried to limit use of the death penalty. Established the principle of equality of all before the law, so there'd be no special class privileges in Austrian law. That is, basically, if you're wealthy, you're either exempt from some punishment, exempt from some taxation, or if you're ever punished for something, it might be something very mild, like a life fine. Kill a peasant, might have to pay just a little bit of money to the government. So basically, you're rich and famous, you get a free felony. Thank God that doesn't happen here. But basically, no class privilege. Everyone will be treated the same for the law. Yeah. But he ended censorship. That is, the official government censorship. People could print and say whatever they wanted. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Introduced religious toleration. People could practice whatever religion they wanted to. Throughout his reign, Joseph II issued 6,000 decrees and enacted 11,000 different laws. It reigned to last only 10 years. But he also established German as the official bureaucratic language, making sure there's only one language everyone speaks, so just to make everything easy on everybody. But the problem was, he was too much too fast. People didn't get a chance to react to it, people didn't get a chance to get used to it. And his reforms basically ended up having the effect of alienating everybody. Gave everybody what he wanted, but he alienated everybody in the process. For example, religious toleration. Infuriated and alienated all the Catholic priests in the country. Abolishes serfdom. Well, all the landowners were mad at him. Basically told all their workers they could leave. But because the serfs had no lands to work on, no farms to work on, they're mad too. And the 2/3 of the country that is not German does not speak German. German is the official bureaucratic language. They can't read anything anymore. No official government documents because it's in German.
Well, why did you make everybody happy?
Because
exactly. Right.
So, and so all these reforms try to change the country, modernize it, make it a model of Enlightenment ideas of liberty and justice, but couldn't make it work. Next, he died in 1790, a really broken man, just faced by critics on all sides, and some of his successors tried to undo what he did. His brother, Leopold II, came in after him, kept most of his reforms intact, but again, he died at a young age too. Died in 1792. What's that?
Was it just illness that killed him?
Yeah, it's illnesses. Like say simple diseases that are curable or cured today, they'd had no treatment for back then. Everybody got, anybody could get it, anyone gets sick, and anybody dies. So life was very short back then.
That's what I was going to say. These were very unhealthy people.
Just technology.
Leopold was very reform-minded as well. Instituted a series of services for children, services for the mentally ill, instituted a system of smallpox vaccinations. They figured out how they could start defeating smallpox, a disease that killed millions of people across Europe. It's like chickenpox on steroids. Actually, it's a horrible disease, but it's very common. But they're figuring out the primitive vaccination process by basically infecting people with a very mild version called cowpox. Now, cowpox, you wouldn't get smallpox.
Who was the guinea pig for that?
A man named Dr. Edward Jenner, he basically tested himself and his own kids.
Oh, man.
Because they saw that milkmaids who got cowpox, a version of it from cows, they'd say they only very mild illness, they never died, and they never got smallpox.
What was the man's name?
Jenner.
Leopold?
Yeah. So basically, he instituted a national program of smallpox vaccination
And this is in Austria?
in Austria. And Austria and Prussia, these were very advanced countries. Even more advanced than the United States in some ways.
What was in there?
Cowpox.
Yeah.
But the worldwide effort, smallpox was eliminated entirely. The last case of smallpox was in 1971. So it must be the United States don't need to get smallpox vaccinations anymore because the disease is extinct.
What is back then like Black Plague and stuff?
You have other diseases, like bubonic plague and so forth, but they didn't have any treatments for that yet. Like I say, antibiotics would be developed until the early 1900s. There's some vaccinations for other diseases developed in the late 1800s, but those are still years away at this point. So something simple as the measles vaccine didn't come out until the early 1960s.
Penicillin was first made.
I think the 1920s, but it wasn't commonly used till it started being used till like the 1930s, 1940s.
Yeah, but some of them, they're blue.
Yeah,
Not to be vaccinated.
and some people were scared; they didn't understand it.
Yeah.
But Russia has an interesting situation. Peter the Great, from 1689 to 1725, remade Russia. Russia was always, up to this point, been kind of on the outskirts of Europe. Kind of on the edge between Asia and Europe. Most of its concerns was fighting the Mongols, who controlled most of Siberia and even most of Russia, and slowly fighting back and whittling back Mongol control. But Russia, for most of its history, wasn't much involved in the affairs of Europe. But Peter the Great changed that. Modernizes Russia, reorganizes it, makes it a great power in Europe. And because of a series of reforms and conquests, every ruler after him tried to model Peter the Great in some way. He's a giant of a man physically and historically. Still a great figure in Russian history to this day. But when he died, though, basically caught pneumonia after diving into an icy sea trying to retrieve a bunch of men who were drowning as their ship was sinking in the middle of the bay. Basically, he's a hands-on man to the end. Built the first Russian Navy. But when he died, it wasn't clear on who his successor would be, because he didn't have any sons. He had 2 daughters and a wife.
The German one?
Now, in this case, they were Russian. You're going to have the Germans coming in a little bit later, but his wife, Catherine, was the Tsarina for a while. Went from 1725 to 1727. That's natural causes. Except might have been Russian, might have been German. Doesn't matter. Part of the royal family. Basically, she convinced the upper class nobles, the boyars, that she should be in charge. This was very quietly. But he has a nephew. Peter II comes in. Well, he's 11 years old when he comes to the throne, as Emperor of Russia. Fell ill and died at the age of 14. And you have Anna, his niece. She rules 10 years before she does. They're not lasting long. Now, you don't have an Elsa or snowman Olaf.
I really would live in a bubble.
Yeah. Like I said, the problem is, if you did live in a bubble, you get out of the bubble, what happens?
Oh,
You get
your
immunity.
body can't be.
That's the problem with Edward VI, Henry VIII's son. Then Ivan IV. Oh, this is going to break your heart. Ivan VI. 1740 to 1741.
Wow.
2 months old when he comes to the throne. His mother was Anna. But the military basically came in and overthrew him. But he's, yeah, there were cases they had infants coming to the throne because that's the oldest surviving child in Russia. One case where, yeah, the army came in and just killed the baby. Ivan VI, well, it's a fate worse than death. They're not going to kill him. What they do is they send him to an insane asylum. And everyone is forbidden to tell him who he actually is.
That sounds like a movie.
Yeah, there actually was, I think there was a movie made about his life. They said him put in an insane asylum his whole life, horrible conditions. But finally, when Elizabeth, one of the daughters of Peter I, comes to the throne,
Which one did they want to be in second?
Ivan
Oh, I
VI.
thought they killed him.
Now, they kill him in 1764. Elizabeth orders his murder in 1764.
Oh.
Says go in and kill him because he was alive, he was a threat to her throne. And basically, she's ruling Russia with an iron fist.
The movie she got.
Yeah. But it's Elizabeth of Russia,
Oh.
daughter of Peter I. Yeah. Elizabeth of England, very big figure. Elizabeth of Russia could give her a run for her money.
And who was Elizabeth?
She's the daughter of Peter I.
Okay.
Basically, all this internal machinery and back and forth, they're going through basically everybody in the family. Yeah, these are all related to each other, and they're all killing each other. They think your family's messed up. Well, Elizabeth never gets married. She simply has a series of lovers because if she got married, guess what? Her husband becomes the emperor. She wants all the power. So finally, her nephew Peter III comes in after she dies.
So did she have any kids?
Nope.
She was very careful.
Very careful. Probably had a few abortions. That's what happened with Elizabeth I.
Oh, wow.
She was power hungry.
Yeah, she wanted power. She wanted
Back then, who was
But
it?
she's probably a very, very smart lady.
very intelligent. She knows how to maneuver Russian politics, which is very dangerous.
Was Elizabeth's nephew?
Yeah, Elizabeth's nephew, and he's going to end up being a total disaster. His wife is Elizabeth II, is Catherine II. The story we'll get to in more detail next time. We're just setting it all up. But how did Catherine become a great ruler? She learned from Elizabeth very carefully how to maneuver Russian politics.
Stay tuned for the next